Emina 85 na legislature in Guam is back in session from recess. Itautauta, colleagues, Mangagi hit Gwini Gimina dos na tinaitai. Senora Vice Speaker, Gi proponing Bill 196-35, who recognition how. Dispensa hamzu todos y Mestre Moro pago. So Beitagi, be fino English. So manana si Vice Speaker, put for board consiga motna. You are recognized.
Si Diyos Masi, Madam Speaker, and dispensa sa undididi ifino tomorrow, so I'm working on it. Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to move Bill number 196-35 into the third reading file and to discuss it.
Si Diyos Masi, Vice Speaker, lo put for board. Monsignor Taitai i mas as amended than title.
Hungan, Bill number 196-35 LS as amended by the Committee on Education, Air Transportation, and Statistics Research and Planning into the third reading file and discuss.
And the title put for vote.
An act to amend subsection 7116 alpha and delta of Chapter 7, Division 2, Title 17, and subsection 5008.2 alpha, Bravo 1, and Bravo 2, Chapter 5, Title 5 of the Guam Code annotated, relative to authorizing the Guam Department of Education to enter into power purchase agreements to purchase solar energy from qualified providers.
Senator and Vice Speaker, consigliat mona.
Si Diyos Masi, Madam Speaker. During the 32nd Guam Legislature, Public Law 32-95 authorized GDOE to enter into power purchase agreements in order to purchase solar energy from qualified providers. The authorization provided that these agreements would be in the best financial interest of the government of Guam and that this period would not exceed 25 years. These agreements with power purchase providers were subject to selection in a multi-step bid conducted by the General Services Agency. Through Public Law 32-95, though Public Law 32-95 was signed into law during fiscal year 2014, it is currently fiscal year 2020, and GDOE has yet to enter into a PPA conducted by GCA. Each year, GDOE spends nearly $13 million on power to the Guam Power Authority. In an effort to help address GDOE's budgetary challenges, I, along with Senator San Augustine, have introduced Bill number 196-35 LS. This measure would allow GDOE to select through a multi-step bid qualified PPA providers in accordance with the procurement law and regulations of the government of Guam. And so, Madam Speaker, we heard this bill last session, and I asked to table it so we can have a roundtable discussion to address the concerns of some of our colleagues, and also GPA coming a couple days before we went into session addressing their concerns. And really, it was an enlightening discussion. It seems that GPA would like to be the sole procuring authority. However, in closer discussion with the superintendent, he's open to that, but we feel that perhaps it would be I don't know how else to say it. We see the interest of GPA and we see the interest of GDOE, and so we're trying to find a common ground. And also for the people of Guam, because there's this talk about passing on costs to the rest of the island if Department of Education should go solar. And so my concern is that Department of Education, they operate during the day. And so, which is justifiable for them to go solar because their GPA's initial, from my understanding, initial concern was that they're going to have to pass on the base rate to the consumers. And the base rate to maintain the transmission and distribution of the grid. However, if GDOE operates during the day, then there should not be a base rate for transmission and distribution of the grid if 90% of the time their power is on and it's on during the day. Maybe they would turn on the gym lights if there's a game. Perhaps if some of the principals and the staff and the teachers are working late, that's understandable. But they can still use that as a cost that they would pay for in their electricity bill. And also in this power purchase agreement in the public law, they're not supposed to go completely off the grid. It's supposed to be 80% of their power off the grid. And it's not like GDOE is going to do a mass agreement for every school to completely be taken off the grid. GDOE is going to be very prudent about this measure and do it in a pilot phase and to understand the impact that it would have on the electricity bill, which is $13 million, and to see if it's actually a cost-saving a portion. I believe it would be a cost-saving portion because we would not be tapping into GPA during the day, which is when most of the power is utilized. And so really that 20% that GPA should still remain on the grid, that 20% they would still be paying for when they would turn on their gym lights in the evening, when they would turn on their classrooms, or they'd have to operate some of the areas of their schools. And so, Madam Speaker, we move this bill forward. I do have an amendment. It's in section 4, line 6, page 4. And the amendment reads, upon enactment of this bill, GDOE shall calculate its average expenditure on power of the past 3 fiscal years, and this figure shall be used to determine GDOE's realized savings from the implementation of the purchase of solar energy. All realized savings from this implementation shall be used for capital improvement projects, facilities, and maintenance only. Funds shall not lapse. On a quarterly basis, GDOE shall post on its website and submit to e-legislatura a report of the dollar amount and expenditure. So, Madam Speaker, this amendment does several things. The first thing it does is it's wanting us to collect the data. So prove to this body that us entering into this power purchase agreement will save you the amount of dollars that you believe it will save you. Prove to us that you have this plan, and this plan is backed by data. Secondly, it's focuses on the savings from the power, specifically for capital improvement projects. We see that as we approach the budget for Department of Education. We see that it's like $100 million for capital improvement projects to maintain all of our schools and to add and fix and renovate and to perhaps even break down some areas of certain schools. And so we want to make sure that this money, this savings, is being used for that specific purpose, not for additional programs to grow GDOE, not for, I don't know, what else would you use it for, but specifically that we see the money tangible impact on the schools for their capital improvement projects. And then thirdly, Madam Speaker, this is something that we did in the budget cycle, where it's like what we did for GDOE, because they required 1/3 of the government funding of the entire government. We told them that they need to start submitting a CRER. And so we saw that. We see it today. We see the continuing report of expenditures every quarter. And so we're able to track DOE's spending better and to question and have that transparency to be able for us to create a dialogue with GDOE and questioning them on that expenditures. And we see it's available to all of us. It's their CRER, and you can go online and get it. And so not only have we done that, we're doing that also for this project here. So, Madam Speaker, I hope that that's basically the gist of the bill. We're trying to find the realized savings so that we can help GDOE with their capital improvement projects, that they won't have to go out and collect such a huge bond. They could have some kind of capital savings that they can negotiate if they need to fix the schools, and so that we can see it realized in our classrooms for our students. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Hagomas, Vice Speaker Nelson. On the main motion, on the amendment, Senator Clinton Rigel, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this measure as well as the amendment proffered by the author of this measure. I think this is a good bill that will help get GDOE started with implementing some sort of solar program on their schools that will ultimately save GDOE money. I think it's a good idea to have this amendment so that GDOE calculate its average expenditure for the past 3 fiscal years so we can actually see how much money they're saving from it. And then we can see how much of that savings is going directly towards capital improvement projects, facilities, and maintenance. The public has been clamoring for more support to DOE. And, they say, give DOE more money. The public keeps saying, Senators, why aren't you funding this? Why aren't you funding that? We have a limited source of funds. So one way to give DOE more money to fix things like its walkways, like at BMS or other facilities, is to allow them to save money. And there have been some estimates, we don't know exactly how much it'll amount to, but there have been estimates that they could cut their power bill in half. Their current power bill is around $12 million. Imagine if they cut it to $6 million. Imagine if they just cut it to $10 million. That's $2 million they can use to build a walkway at BMS, to build other things that are needed around the schools, and to fix their facilities and maintain their facilities. So I'm in full support of this bill. I know GPA had some concerns. They wanted to be in charge of procurement and other issues, but I think if under the idea that GPA had, it would have resulted in less savings to the school. Because if GPA is the one procuring it, GPA realizes the savings, not DOE. So I think it's better to have DOE procure it. That way they realize the savings, and then those savings can go towards the facilities and towards maintenance of the schools and towards capital improvement projects. Also, as the retiring speaker mentioned and the author of the bill mentioned, there's this talk about avoided cost and cost shifting and sort of the use and the strain on the grid. But I think DOE is a prime candidate for this because, as the previous speaker mentioned, they use power primarily during the daytime. They don't really use power on the weekends. They're not using much power during Christmas break, Easter break, summer break, holidays, and weekends. They primarily use power mostly during the weekdays, Monday through Friday, during the daytime. And I'm pretty sure a large bulk of their power is probably running air conditioning. So at nighttime, when they don't need to run air conditioning, when they don't need to turn on as many lights, their power consumption goes down. And that's right around the time of peak power consumption. So peak power consumption usually begins in the evening, around nighttime, when everyone's getting home from work and getting home from school. They go home and they turn on all their appliances. That's when power consumption really spikes on island. That's when DOE's power consumption goes down because that's when everyone left school and went home already. So I think it's perfect. They'll be providing solar power to themselves during the daytime when they need it, and at nighttime they won't be impacting the grid as much because the schools will be closed. So with that, I rise in full support of both the bill and the amendment proffered by Vice Speaker Nelson. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Buen provecho, Senador Rigel. On the amendment, Senadora Marsh Tatchino, who recognizes
Sujos Masi, Madam Speaker. I too rise in support of both the bill and the amendment. As was stated previously by both the author and the retiring speaker, that this is a way of providing more to GDOE and our students, our island youth, who are part of that system, by hopefully helping them realize some savings. And this amendment does a very important thing because during the discussion of the public hearing, there was unsurety as to how much would be saved, and there hadn't been a calculation, a solid calculation. And so this amendment allows for us to have some sort of basis, some sort of foundational understanding of what the typical rates have been and the potential of the savings that are going to be realized, and then very purposefully and very proactively, I would like to point out, takes those realized savings and apply them in a very significant way to these millions and millions of dollars of deferred capital improvement projects that are hindering the success of our schools and our students within them. So these capital improvement projects, they will be able to address the health, the safety, the well-being of our island youth, And those, of course, are all important things to stand for. So I stand in support of both the bill and the amendment. Sa Diyos maasi.
Buen provecho, Senator and March Taitsino. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator San Augustine, put for vote. Consigue mo na.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, as a co-sponsor of the bill, I stand in support of the bill and even the amendment. I'd like to remind our colleague, if you look at the history of DOE, when it deals with solar power, they sent a RFP, if I'm correct, to GSA. It never moved for 4 years.
4 terms.
Was that?
4 terms.
4 terms, even further. And what was kind of bothered me was that I understand where GPA is coming from, but through the many years, the DOE was trying to find a way to save money. And I'm not saying anything bad about GPA, but all of a sudden now you want to join the train as it's moving down the track. You should have joined in the very beginning. And if anything, if GPA wants to be so concerned about the solar initiative that DOE is going through, maybe they need to just focus on the total island and help everybody reduce its power costs, because it's costing the people of Guam enough money already as it is. And they have other solar projects that they even admitted that it wasn't a profit that they did down south. So I only look at it this way, is that when we were looking at this, and I had touched base on this with the author of the bills, that they could save approximately probably $3 to $5 million a year. And because of the amendment to be added on that is specific to CIP or maintenance costs, it lines up perfectly, because even if they had $90 million for deferred maintenance, we couldn't, I honestly don't believe we could have gotten a contractor to go in there and do $90 million worth of work. We probably could do $5 or $10 million a year, but they also do have in their budget, and I know that my colleagues are going to support DOE in finding ways separate from their savings here to add some funding in their budget to make sure they're able to do their CIP projects, their maintenance, maintain their schools. So, you know, I do rise in support, and I do hope this goes through, because right now the leased schools are going after solar. And if anything, this should be able to help GPA reduce the cost of the people of Guam, because when the solar panels are on the schools during the weekends and during the summer when the schools are not open, that's extra power. And if they don't figure that by now, we're in trouble when we're dealing with GPA.
Si Zeus Masi, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Therese Terlahi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In regards to the amendment is very specific, and so not on the bill at this point. I'd just like to speak on the amendment. And there are several parts to it. So the part that says that GDOE shall calculate its average expenditure on power of the past 3 fiscal years, and that figure shall be used to determine the realized savings from the implementation of solar energy. I have no objection to that part, Madam Speaker. I mean, we need a base to compare, you know, what we are really getting for our money here. And so I have no objection to that part. But the next sentence, Madam Speaker, says that all realized savings from this implementation shall be used for capital improvement projects, facilities, and maintenance only. That was the whole point of Public Law 32-95. Public Law 32-95 was enacted in 2013. And it very specifically says where the savings are supposed to go. And it's very clear that was the point of the whole law, that the savings are going to go to these areas. And so, of course, they wanted the savings to go back to the schools. So in that law, they specified in one subsection that each participating school will have access to 50% of the energy savings yielded from the PPA. The savings shall be transferred from the utility pool and deposited into a Quentin Salapit Principat Fund for each respective school. And if I may say so, Madam Speaker, All of this is being paid by taxpayers. Taxpayers currently are paying for GDOE's power. We are paying for GDOE's power, and while we pay our own power bills. So what they wanted to do was to put that money, instead of paying power, paying to the principals themselves so that they could use it as needed on a school basis. On the next subsection of the original law that authorized DOE and GSA to get solar energy, the next subsection says that each participating school will have access to the remaining 50% of the energy yielded. The savings shall be transferred to maintenance division for the maintenance and repair of all DOE schools from the utility pool and deposited into the energy efficient fund for each respective school from the energy savings produced from the lower cost of energy. So while, maybe this is a policy change, but I'm not sure if it's an intended policy change that now we don't want the schools to have it per se, we want to put it into a capital improvement fund, or do we want to maintain the original intent of the law, which was that each principal, each school is going to get their percentage of savings, keep that money in the school. And really this was just a budgeting tool for the legislature. Instead of putting money in for power, we're now putting money in, and we're going to feel better that we're putting money in directly for school services or school repairs, school whatever that the principals decided that they needed. And I guess just seeing this amendment for the first time this morning, my preference is to remain with the original law that will allow the principals to have that type of discretion, as they were supposed to be incentivized to have cost savings in energy and.
Senator Terlahi, would you like me to have that as a yielding to the author of the main?
No, Madam Speaker, I'm
Okay.
just speaking on the amendment.
Thank you.
So that's my concern with the amendment. And that's, if I don't support the amendment, it's because of that. It's because we're changing from the original intent of this law, which was to benefit each school and have those principals decide how it would be spent, versus general capital improvement projects in general. I think maybe I don't know, without knowing anything else, it sounds to me like the more specific that we put it back to the schools that are actually having savings, we put it back to them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Just a point of information, Madam Speaker.
Por favor, consiga mo na Senator and Vice Speaker.
I believe what the previous speaker is referring to, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is 17 GCA, Chapter 7, subsection sorry, there's a lot of letters in this subsection. Subsection 7116. And it states here that each participating school will have access to 50% of the energy savings yield from the PPA and GDOE for the respective schools. The savings shall be transferred from the Unity Pool and deposited into Iquentan Salapi Principat fund for each respective school from the energy savings produced from the lower cost of energy provided by PPA. The funds will be available within 30 days from the close of each quarter. That's Section R, and then subsection S, Sierra. Each participating school will have access to the remaining 50% of the energy savings yield from the PPA for the respective schools. The savings shall be transferred to Maintenance Division for the maintenance and repair of all DOE schools from the utility pool and deposited into the Energy Efficient Fund for each respective school from the energy savings produced from the lower cost of energy provided by PPA. The funds will be available within 30 days from the close of each quarter. So from my understanding, right now, there was a public hearing, and in one instance, one of our colleagues asked, how big is your maintenance division? And the maintenance division was, I think, less than 10 personnel working maintenance for the entire Guam Department of Education. Another concern was when we tried to do the budget appropriation last year, and it's a very contentious thing. For some reason, I don't know why. We had the principals come in, and I asked each and every principal if they would have a problem during the first public hearing, if they would have a problem with them having a say-so on where their money went for each school. And every principal I asked, they said they had no problem. But then when the bill came out, the principals felt that they were misinformed, or that we did not communicate to them what the intent was to give each individual school their appropriation specifically. And so they were concerned about this very vague and ambiguous term of site-based management. And so the principals made it very clear after they realized that, oh, we're taking authority away from the superintendent, and now we get to determine what priorities we want to address within our school. They did not feel that they wanted to deal with that added responsibility. The added responsibility that I made clear in the previous public hearing when we were discussing the budget, and the superintendent and I kind of got into it about site-based management. Just because we don't always agree does not mean that we can work together, because we do work together. And he's a great partner and collaborator, so I'm grateful to have a superintendent as such. But we had a disagreement in this where I'm saying that you have an issue, you input it into Munis, and then central operations, you're paid to do the procurement and the processing, you act on what the principal says is his or her priority. So that got confused, because the principals still in their mind are thinking that, oh, I have to do my own procurement, I have to do my own hiring, I have to do my own HR process, which really is not the intent, and it specifically states that's not the intent. The only thing that drives it is it limits the superintendent the ability on what he can spend the money for. So in a sense, perhaps we're like micromanaging the superintendent, but I feel that that's not something bad. I feel that that's something good, because this is a big part of our taxpayers' dollars. And so that is just a concern that when we stay true to this, again, with seeing the events unfold, how the principals are under the impression that, again, they're going to be responsible for it, that creates the crux of the issue, the contention. And so I am all for giving the schools this savings that they would yield if they have solar power. I would just ask the help of the previous speaker to evolve the amendment so that it's very clear that the principals are not having to do their own procurement, they're not having to do their own maintenance of hiring maintenance personnel, they're not having to do their own contracts or requests for proposals or requests for bids or requests for quotes. So if we can ensure the principals that central operations will perform these measures in the way we write this amendment to make it better, if that's the case, so that the school sees the savings directly and they can create the priority, then I would ask the help of legal. So I'd like to take a quick recess to see if we can work this out and move forward at that time.
So moved. We are in recess for a moment. Termina 35 na legislature in Guam is back from
Session,
recess.
recess.
Vice Speaker, we were with the Vice Speaker on the point of information.
Yes.
And there was going to be a,
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So because we went into recess and the dialogue really was the issue, not the issue, but the foundation of power purchase agreement with GDOE. The problem is that GDOE has submitted to GSA or has tried to work with GSA for many, many years. Let me be more specific. Since 2013. And so really there hasn't been any movement into entering into a power purchase agreement. So now we're looking to give GDOE the authority to say, you know, with consultation with GPA, the Guam Power Authority, that you will have the flexibility to enter into a power purchase agreement responsibly. And so there was a concern that was brought up because of Public Law 3295, which is a good law, and I read it out, and I'll read it again. In subsection 7116, chapter 7, or 17 GCA, chapter 7, the question that comes into place is subsection R, as in Romeo, and S as in Sierra. And R reads, each participating school will have access to 50% of the energy savings yielded from the PPA and GDOE for the respective schools. The savings shall be transferred from the utility pool and deposited into Icuentan Salapi Principat fund for each respective school from the energy savings produced by lower cost energy provided by the PPA, and the funds will be available within 30 days from the close of each quarter. And each participating school will have access to the remaining 50%. Each participating school of the PPA will have access to the remaining 50%. So if I'm MU Lujan and I put solar energy up in my school, I get 50% from my Salapi Principat, and I get 50% to use for the maintenance of my school or any projects that I need, like renovations of the bathroom, building an awning, etc. And the savings shall be transferred to Maintenance Division for the maintenance and repair of all DOE schools from the utility pool and deposit into the energy efficient fund for each respective school from the energy savings. I'm not, I don't cause that, that bind, that debt to the people where my utilities is going to be higher. The people will see it invested back into their children, will see it invested in their schools. And so the concern is that we're under some impression that the superintendent wants to go and use this savings to go out and get a bond, a large bond for maintenance. And so we haven't really had an in-depth discussion in that. But the law still stands that this is where it's going to go. And so we're, right now I'd like to remove this piece right here where it says on line 4 of the amendment, I would like to line out the sentence that reads, all realized savings from the implementation shall be used for capital improvement projects, facilities, and maintenance only, because the public law already stands at 3295. Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. So just to reiterate, line 4, section 4, all realized savings from this implementation shall be used for capital projects, facilities, and maintenance only. We're lining that out.
on that motion, are there any objections? Senator Chalayi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I support the amendment to the amendment, and although this was all raised under a point of information, I have no objection to that, but I just also want to reiterate that, yeah, the original law does not detract or say it's not going to go need as far as capital improvements or facility repair. And so I support that, and I support the notion that if we are going to make amendments to the original intent of the law, that we're going to have another public hearing on that to determine what's the best use of the savings. And I just want to remind everybody that the savings is really, it's a commitment that was made by prior legislatures, because the savings really comes back to the government of Guam, and we should be able to allocate that wherever necessary. And that's why we want to reduce costs, or expenses at DOE. And they committed back then that this is where it should be used. I think we all agree if we can get savings, we give it back to DOE. So I think it's consistent, Madam Speaker, with the original if we let it go back to the schools. Si Diyos masi.
Thank you, Senator Terlahi. Senator San Augustine, who recognize
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment to the amendment, but with reservations.
Okay.
We are going to, my colleagues, be reminded, we'll be moving into the budget side, and we'll be taking a look at DOE. And when we take a look at DOE, we're going to be looking at their maintenance, their $90 million maintenance plan that was done by the Army Corps of Engineers. And we talk about the principals, was that the principals fund? We're going to be taking a look at every part of that. But I do rise in support, but like I mentioned, with reservation, because the budget will be coming up. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Anyone else on the amendment to the amendment? If not, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Now on the main amendment as amended, Senator Biscoli, you are recognized.
Si Diyos maasi, Madam Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of this measure and this amendment, and I thank my colleagues for working together to ensure that this amendment exists in harmony with the current language in the Guam Code annotated. Madam Speaker, with millions and millions of dollars in deferred maintenance across our public school system, and millions that school communities could put to good use, it really does make a lot of sense to put these savings that should be realized through this measure for these brick and mortar projects, and for the best use of these savings as determined by the stakeholders on the ground. Madam Speaker, this discussion reminded me of the very first bill that I introduced in 2018. In the 34th Guam Legislature, we took money from the recently cut senatorial salaries and directed that funding to our classrooms to maintain our schools and really make good on the promise to prioritize our students. Madam Speaker, the funds identified by this proposal can help the campuses with leaky roofs, with broken air conditioners, with rusty railings, and to install covers for our walkways. When we consider all of the complaints of students and parents and teachers on the state of our island's campuses, this amendment just makes sense, including the language which does not permit this money to lapse. As my colleagues have mentioned, this could be several $1 million annually used for immediate repairs, or, as the existing statute allows, to purchase small miscellaneous items for classroom and library materials, for supplies and equipment. Madam Speaker, I'm also appreciative that the amendment proffered by the author of this bill also creates baseline data to accurately account for the savings realized by moving towards solar energy. This is a good step forward to help our public schools save money on utility costs, to invest in more sustainable forms of energy for our largest government agency, and ultimately direct that savings from this change back into critical areas in our public schools. So, Madam Speaker, I certainly rise in support of this amendment. I rise in support of this measure. I want to thank the author of the bill, as well as our co-sponsors, and encourage all my colleagues to please support it. Si Diyos maasi.
Buen provecho, Senator Lee. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, are there any objections? Would you like to close, Vice Speaker? Are there any objections? Hearing none. There's an objection? No. If there are no, on the amendment, if there are no objections, motion carries. We are now on the main motion. Vice Speaker, you still had the floor. You were speaking on the main motion, and then you did the amendment. We are completed.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Dunklana Sijasmasi. I just want to say thank you for the support of the amendment, and I know that some of my colleagues have some amendments they'd like to address for the bill. Thank you.
Sijasmasi. So on the main motion, Senator Tello Taitagui, Minority Leader, you are recognized.
Sejus Masi, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on Bill 196. And I appreciate the author of the bill. This bill was brought into the last session, but was put aside, which helped us a lot, because there was a lot of concerns that we had on this bill. But I think the greatest concern that most of us have here is the issue of, if we go into solar, all of a sudden, create all the schools into solar, that this may be detrimental to us ratepayers, that this might go up. The cost of power may go up if we do this. And that was a big concern. But Madam Speaker, my concern is providing more information and data that's needed before we go into this PPA. Now, I'm a great advocate for the environment. I mean, I've created legislations that protected our environment, and also even put legislation on the recovery of methane fuel from our landfill. However, Madam Speaker, I think there needs to be more done before we go into a power purchase agreement to ensure that we've done our due diligence to see the cost analysis. And one of them that was brought up during the public hearing, Madam Speaker, was the ability for Guam Department of Education to purchase their own power panels. This would save quite a bit of money. But of course, where are we going to get the funding to purchase this? Now, the PPA provides these panels, but also provides a monthly payment for these panels. And the question is, are we paying, and it's a question I'd like to ask the author of the bill, are we paying for the amount of generation kilowatts per month by this PPA? Is that the intent? Or are we paying for just a set amount every month? So in other words, Madam, probably a little bit confusing. If you have an agreement with the PPA to provide X amount of kilowatts a month or per day, and for some reason it doesn't generate that amount of kilowatt, but we're still required to pay for that monthly installment, versus paying for the amount of kilowatts that's coming in to the schools and paying only for that amount. So my question to the author is, what is the intention for this PPA? If she should so yield.
Thank you, Senator Taitagui. Vice Speaker Nelson, would you like to yield to that?
My apologies to the previous speaker. Madam Speaker, I don't understand the question. There was degradation that we are paying. What is the degradation? I think when we talk about degradation in power or degradation of services, meaning that it's not working properly, and that's how are we paying for something that's not working properly? So if the previous speaker can just make it clear, I maybe one question at a time, and then I can try to understand and respond in the like.
Cesar Masi, Vice Speaker.
Okay.
Minority Leader, would you like to rephrase or restate the question?
Sure, and I apologize if it sounds a little bit confusing. Sometimes this power purchase agreement is a bit confusing. That's why I'm really happy, Madam Speaker, that we have GPA there who's very well versed on PPAs. Basically, the question is, when you're going into a power purchase agreement, PPA, you can go into twofold. One, you can do it based on how much kilowatts is generated per month, and that's what you're paying for on a monthly basis. Or you can just pay for the panels itself, regardless how much kilowatts is provided to the building, the facility. So my question is, has this been brought up, or is it something that was a consideration in this PPA?
Vice Speaker Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. From my understanding, when you enter into a power purchase agreement, there's usually an agreement on how much energy would be produced. And so that's how you would enter into this agreement about the kilowatts per hour needed. And GDOE has listed over the past 4 years in their energy conservation efforts. So the FY 2019 data from them doing this information shows the amount of kilowatts per hour that they utilize and the annual spend for each school. And so that would be what they would use the basis on, because they've been tracking this thing for the past 4 years.
Thank you, Vice Speaker Nelson. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And that sounds good. I'm glad this is on the record, that was the intent, to go into some kind of power purchase agreement that's based on how much kilowatt is brought in. As you know, Madam Speaker, there has been some people who have invested into this PPA, and a lot of complaints have been going to GPA saying that this power purchase agreement was not what they anticipated, because they end up still receiving a bill from GPA. Now, this is on a private homes, that they're still receiving a bill from GPA. That's not what they signed up for, but unfortunately, they're stuck with a 30-year contract with this PPA, and they can't get out of it. So, Madam Speaker, my first amendment is basically to provide a verification on a savings cost analysis. My first amendment is line 26, page 2. Speaking before this amendment, in ensuring that when they get into this agreement, that they do it, with both eyes opened and find out if there really is a cost savings to this. And my amendment is simply on line 26, page 2, section D, where it says, Guam DOE shall seek technical consultation, and my amendment is to including a cost analysis from the Guam Power Authority in implementing this section, and the Guam Power Authority shall provide the technical consultation upon request at no cost to GDOE. And it may further seek technical consultation with Guam Energy Office, the Department of Parks, Public Works, the Guam Renewable Energy Association, and a third-party renewable energy consultant in implementing this section. And the consultation should not be at no cost to Guam DOE. Any costs associated with the third-party consultant will be passed through in total to the qualified PPA providers equally in full who is awarded the multi-step bid. So that's my first amendment, Madam Chair. And it's simply, Madam Speaker, and it's simply just to go that extra distance, to foresee something before we get started in putting out bids for PPAs. It's already included.
Thank you, Minority Leader. On Minority Leader's amendment, Vice Speaker Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just would respectfully like to pose a point of inquiry to the previous speaker on the amendment.
Please state your question.
There's a lot of papers here.
That's okay. Take your time.
The cost analysis, including a cost analysis in this area. If If it could be explained, because I don't understand, if it could be explained, is it the cost analysis that we are already requiring GDOE to do with the previous amendment that we passed, and also that they have been doing where they have been tracking their power bill, that type of cost analysis, or what GPA thinks that the cost analysis would be in savings for the school? So if it can just be a little bit clear, because
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Minority Leader, would you like to yield?
Absolutely, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, cost analysis includes everything, not only what data and information that was provided on how much energy is used through these schools, but a cost analysis in respect to if we started off with only one school or two schools to start this program. A cost analysis is to see if there is really true savings if we were to go through a PPA, or if we go through outright purchasing these panels out through the Department of Education. So consultation is one thing, but I wanted us to not assume that consultation incorporates a cost analysis. So it doesn't, and this is just to make it clear that a cost analysis should be put in place, and we can see all the aspects on how to move forward with solar panels. That's what it means.
Vice Speaker, does that suffice, or
not quite, Madam Speaker, so if I can just ask a quick recess and then maybe get
I'll
with
allow
legal.
that.
Thank you,
We're in a
Madam Speaker.
moment's recess. A minuto 35 na legislatura in Guam is back from recess. Vice Speaker, you had the floor.
Madam Speaker, I'd have to respectfully object to this amendment. It's not clear what cost analysis really is. It's not clear where GPA, if GPA will stonewall GDOE, just like they've experienced with GSA on that cost analysis. There are measures ensuring that there has been data that has been tracked for 4 years to show the different types of energy absorbed or energy generated from the schools. And there is a requirement that consultation be done with GPA, technical assistance be done with GPA. And so really, I feel that it would behoove GPA to do a cost analysis. I just don't want it being a requirement and something GPA can say, well, because we all know that there's contention here between GPA's interest and then the bonds with them going to get the bonds, and it's another discussion, but I object.
Si Jos Masi, Vice Speaker, anyone else on the Tadigui amendment? Anyone? Senator Terlahi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to rise in regards to the allegation that anybody is stonewalling anyone. I think that that's not going to be conducive to what we're trying to do here, and I don't see that to be in the record, that anyone has been stonewalled by GPA or that DOE was held back even by GSA, because that's not clear on the record. What's very clear on the record is that GSA put out, I don't know, an RFI or an RP, but they had issues. There were issues, and they're even, if you want to call it stonewalled, by the Attorney General of Guam, because there are issues. And that's my concern with the bill in general, is that whether this bill is really addressing the issues that have been raised, and really they were just tweaks to the original law that needed to be done, versus blaming GSA
Point
that
of personal
they're
privilege, Madam
incompetent
Speaker.
or stonewalling
Point of
anybody.
personal privilege.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Point of personal privilege, Madam
There's-
Speaker. If this is going to create a debate, then I will withdraw the words of stonewall,
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you.
because
Thank
it's going
you.
to be a distraction from what
Thank
the
you,
bill
Vice
really
Speaker.
does.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Anyone else on the amendment? Duly noted on the point of personal privilege.
Has there been I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, has there been an objection?
There has been an objection, Minority Leader. Would you like to close?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, for that. Okay. Data changes all the time. Technology changes every single day. To say that we had something that was put together from 4 years ago, it's like I said, our cell phones. How many times do we get the Series 1, 2, 3 that comes out every year? That's why this cost analysis is needed, especially updated. It's very simple. Asking for how much savings are we really truly going to get? If we go with the PPA, if we go with outright purchasing, through federal funding, maybe we can purchase these power panels ourselves and save even more money. That's why it doesn't make any sense. A cost analysis is put in place to make sure there are options out there that we can take, and not just cover the blinders on our eyes and not look at all those options. Cost analysis is used in everything that we do. It's important to have this. Now, Madam Speaker, if somebody wanted to make an amendment to say, including a cost analysis in a timely manner to provide to GDOE, I have no problem with that. If they're worried that it's going to be delayed, then put an amendment in this section. I'll be happy to support it. Maybe a cost analysis that would be provided within 2 months. And if the person that objected to this amendment thinks that it's not enough time. Well, they have some data, they said, that would provide some of that work. But like I said, every day technology changes, data changes. And if we truly want to save some money and find out options that we have out there to do that in cost savings, well, with cost savings comes with a cost analysis as well. It goes hand in hand. So I ask my colleagues to kindly support this amendment because it's important. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Buen provecho, Senator Tadegui. There has been an objection to the minority leader's amendment. All those in favor of Senator Tadegüi's, no, it's her amendment. All those in favor of Senator Tello Tadegüi's amendment, there has been an objection. Please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Minority Leader Tadegui, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my next amendment is very simple. It's on line 11, page 2. And what this amendment does, Madam Speaker, well, allow me to read it for you first. Line 11, page 2. Section 7116, Power Purchase Agreement to purchase solar energy. A, the Guam Department of Education may enter into one or more power purchase agreements to purchase solar energy for qualified providers, which will be in the best financial interest of the government of Guam for a period up to and not exceeding 25 years. Such qualified PPA providers shall be selected by a multi-step bidder conducted by Guam or GDOE in accordance with the procurement law and regulations of the government of Guam. The qualified PPA provider will be responsible for providing a PPA to cover no more than 80% of the school's power needs. All GDOE-owned schools, GDOE administrative, and GDOE auxiliary buildings for schools occupied under a lease agreement as of the enactment of the section, GDOE may amend its lease agreements or otherwise directly enter a PPA with the lease lessor for the purchase of solar power produced with renewable energy directly for the lessor and without application of the procurement law. And this is where my amendment comes in, Madam Speaker. GDOE is encouraged to participate in energy-efficient programs available through the Guam Power Authority and shall make every effort to secure federal funding opportunities to augment any local appropriations authorized for the power purchase agreement. Madam Speaker, during the public hearing and even on the roundtable, it was brought up that GPA worked with actually the University of Guam, and they implemented a cost analysis, well, not a cost analysis, but a savings program. And in that section, and it was in the media recently, not recently, but during the time that it was implemented, that the Consolidated Commission on Utilities had instructed GPA to take the bull by the horns and find a way to make this happen with regards to energy efficiency. So what happened was they worked with the University of Guam Endowment Office as a baseline for comparison. GPA saw savings of about $5,000 per year for the Sea Grant Office. Invested in energy efficiency may have extraordinary rates of return over solar power purchase agreements, GPA stated. And if I'm not mistaken, that savings was almost 70% on the the program that they implemented. And my amendment basically moves in that direction to first, let's do our due diligence and find ways to reserve our energy and utilize these saving measures by installing these ED lights, using the Star Alliance air conditioning, covering up areas in which I heard someone mention that some of the windows are not secured enough when the air conditioner is on and it's leaking out, the cold air is leaking out. But there's other ways, efficient energy ways of saving. And this is basically to look at programs that are available out there for Guam Department of Education. And in fact, it says too in this report, at this point, GDOE and GPA are working on setting up a pilot school to implement cost-saving measures. GPA did something similar with the University of Guam, as I mentioned before. I'm not sure how far they've gotten because during the public hearing, it really wasn't emphasized enough on exactly what they did at GDOE for these cost-saving measures. So my amendment is simply to encourage Department of Education to participate in this energy program available through the GPA. And also, Madam Speaker, federal funding out there to look into utilizing federal funding to purchase these power panels. I mean, that's a great savings. And it was mentioned even during the public hearing that if GDOE purchased their own solar panels or even get it through a federal grant, that's savings right there. And everybody's talking about savings, so this is an opportunity as well. And I hope my colleagues support this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Minority Leader. On the amendment, anyone else wish? Vice Speaker Nelson, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment. It's already something that they're doing, and so I think it's good for extra measure that my colleague feels like they'd like to add extra measure into this. I'm fine with that.
Sizulis Masi, Vice Speaker. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. On the main motion, I apologize, Senator Taitigui, Minority Leader, you are still recognized on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, I'd like to thank my colleagues for supporting the last amendment and hopefully reconsider the first amendment I put through. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the main motion, are anyone speaking on the main motion? Senator Sabina Perez, and then I have Senator Luis Muñoz. Consigue Mona, Senator Perez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the move to more energy or fossil fuel independence, and since GDOE is one of the largest consumers of energy on island, I think it makes a lot of sense that we support the move towards solar energy for providing their energy. I just want to proffer an amendment here. I believe it's been passed out. It's on line 26, page 2. The amendment reads, D, Guam Power Authority shall provide to GDOE consultation and technical assistance in implementing this section and for the life of the contract at no cost to GDOE. And then the rest is status quo. So the purpose of this amendment is, it's been 7 years since the bill was passed to allow GDOE to engage in power purchase agreements. And I think with the participation by Guam Power Authority, I think it's important because they are the experts in regards to implementing such contracts. So I think, in addition to that, what this amendment does, in addition to kind of strengthening their participation as consultants, I think it's important to look at the life of the contract itself, and and their ability to monitor the contract to make sure that the terms are agreed and are followed. So that's the purpose of this particular amendment. Thank you.
Si Masi, Senator in Paris. On the Paris Amendment, anyone wishing to speak? Senator Terlahi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It seems to me the major change in this amendment is that GPA is going to be required to provide consultation and technical assistance in the implementation for the duration of the contract, as opposed to, prior to the procurement. And it was very clear at the hearings that have been had on this bill that GPA's position is that they want their expertise to do the procurement for the government of Guam, and that they propose will save money for taxpayers as opposed to the risk of increasing rates, because when you take GDOE, which I understand is the biggest government user of power, convert it to solar, that whatever the savings may be on our, paying power bills is going to be picked up by ratepayers. I, for one, do not want to support anything that's going to increase the amount of power that needs, the cost of power to ratepayers. I think we have to be very, very careful. And obviously, I'm not a power expert and not a solar expert, but I do think it's worth considering what they've really tried to do. So what GPA's tried to do is give us, the legislature, technical advice at this point, and saying, take a little while longer and look at the procurement of solar energy at this point, that it's really changed since the original passage of this bill, I think 2013 we said, and in light of what GPA has learned in its own procurement of solar power and the continuous changes that go on, that it is the expert. So while I have no objection to them being mandated to provide GDOE consultation and technical assistance at no cost, if they're going to be bound to continue to, help DOE through a contract that DOE by itself procures with, we're not giving GPA any kind of authority here. I just feel like it may have implications for us that we're not aware of at this point. For example, the hospital, the electrical panel, we're now looking at GPA to help us keep this electrical panel running throughout its, however long we're going to keep that old panel there. And so this is an added service that GPA is doing that I don't think it's being billed. This is one of those things that I don't know who bears the cost for that type of thing. We're saying no cost to DOE, but I'm hoping it's not going to be cost to ratepayers, Madam Speaker, because that's what I don't want to support. It's a inadvertent increase in cost to ratepayers. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator Terlahi. Senator Bisco Lee, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, I have a question for the author of this amendment, if she'll yield.
Please state the question.
Thank you. It's my understanding that this amendment would GPA would be authorized, or they would have to provide GDOE consultation and technical assistance to implement this section for the life of the contract. So let's say that's 30 years at no cost to the Guam Department of Education. I guess my first question is, have we communicated with GPA? Are they okay? Are they open to providing this free consultation to GDOE for the life of the contract, potentially 30 years for this free service or however long it'll be. I'm just concerned because we could be entering into an agreement that they had no input on, and they weren't involved in kind of the deal-making process, and then they're required to advise on a deal that they didn't support in the first place. So I just wanted to ask the author of the amendment if GPA was aware of this amendment, that we would now be requiring them to provide this consultation and technical assistance, and if they're in support of that.
Senator Lee. I'm going to ask Senator Paris, would you like to yield to the question?
Yes, I would, Madam Chair. So I just want to make one clarification that this amendment doesn't take away consultation for procurement. And that's why there's an and in between where it says implementing this section and for the life of the contract at no cost. So it was designed to cover both bases during the procurement process as well as after the contract is awarded. In regards to reaching out to GPA, my office actually is reaching out to them at this moment. So, yeah, so I think what the purpose though is, I think what's really important to understand is that, actually the law says 25 years, that it cannot exceed 25 years, and that I think what's really critical is that oftentimes at the end of the term of a contract, such as 25 years, that's when things start to come apart. And I think it's important to extend their oversight for that towards the very end, and rather than just limiting it to a portion of that term of the service. So I think that's my response for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Senator Lee, does that suffice? You still have the floor.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if I could just ask the retiring speaker to clarify if they have had an opportunity to speak with GPA about this amendment and what their response is.
Thank you. I'm going to ask her again. She did note that the office is reaching out to her right now. So I'm just going to take a moment. Vice Speaker, you are recognized.
I'd like to make a motion to recess, Madam Speaker, and come back at 14:30. Thank you.
14:30. On that motion, we are in recess to give Senator Paris enough time to also ask. Thank you. We are in recess.